We have a number of attendees. So briefly, I will leave the rest of the introductions to Raymond. I just wanted to talk about this series of conversations that the Law Africa Institute will be hosting under what we've called the Covid-19 Reset project. Now, the Covid-19 Reset project is a response that we're tasked with at the Institute by our head of faculty and founder, Angelo, to find ways of imagining how our fellows can respond to this, what has become a truly global pandemic. And we came up with a two-pronged approach, one involving our fellows, so our fellows' response. And our fellows' response takes on a number of different forms. So we've had conversations in the past with frontline health workers in our network, Dr. Martin Balava, Dr. Prosper Himbisibwe, and Joanne Vanunji. This was at the end of April, when we're really, starting to come to terms with COVID-19 and the effects. Beyond that, we've also reached out to artists within our network to find artistic ways of imagining, what we're going through. So beyond the statistics that we're getting from our health authorities, beyond the directives from government, we're interested in understanding socially how has this pandemic affected everyone, not just people in our network. The other approach is mental health. Now, the mental health aspect of this pandemic is quite serious. A number of countries across the world, a number of organizations are grappling with this issue. How do you deal with this moment where for the first time in the lives of many people, they've had to stay at home and reimagine work differently. So life has to continue in some way. You still have to provide some, for some essential workers, you're required to even contribute more, but you're doing this in a context that has totally changed. So at some point, the Institute will again engage mental health experts, psychiatrists within our network and beyond to reflect more deeply on these issues and see how we can more effectively respond to this as individuals, but also as communities. Now, the conversation we're having today, which is focused on jobs and the future of work beyond COVID, is the first of a four-part series that will focus on jobs and the future of work, industries and ideas for the future, leadership in chaos and the COVID-19 pandemic, and then eventually the big pandemic that may still hit us, which is climate change. So with those few words from the Law Africa Institute, we're really excited to see this project get off ground, and we're excited to see some of the insights that came through this morning from Angelo and Brenda, and we hope this is the start of many such conversations that will hopefully drive us to, a better world and, better ways of managing this crisis. So over to you, Raymond.
Thank you so much, Kwesi, for that elaborate introduction. There are not few words, there were quite a lot of words. But yeah, so we have Angelo here and we have Brenda Katwesigye all on the chat. I want to just give each of them about a minute each to introduce themselves to you guys in the best way possible. I didn't want to introduce them because they might have new and varying profiles that they don't want me to introduce. The COVID pandemic has changed the way we work, so they might have changed workspaces. So I'll let them introduce themselves and we can start.
Brenda, do you want to go first?
I know it's always ladies first. First of all, it's nice to see all of you are wearing glasses, so that's going to make my point for this conversation today. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Great. So I'm called Brenda Katwesigye. I'm the co-founder of Wazivision. Wazivision makes eyewear and a lot of other products from plastic waste. But also, I recently joined the Innovation Village as a consultant in their strategy and innovation department. And some of the things that we are working on are to really support businesses to work through the challenges of COVID-19 and beyond COVID-19. So it's really exciting to be part of this conversation.
That's very interesting that you are, making glasses from recycling material. As you may notice, my glasses are rigged, and this small rigging was done by Obuiza, which is a small business somewhere in Kambodsha. Now, my current practice is verification registration services, which is VRS in short, which is a for-profit desk of our think tank, Fanaka Kwawote. That particular organization has been around since 2008. And what Kwawote was conceived as is just a domestic think tank to support the efforts of mostly East Africans to try and coordinate knowledge and to provide thought leadership. I must tell you, by the way, that me and my colleagues very early on realized that you can't run a think tank without money. And that since we couldn't raise money abroad because we are essentially a domestic organization, we decided from the start to volunteer. I am the volunteer in chief. So I am now on assignment with the Leo Africa Institute, volunteering my services as head of faculty. And this is what I do on a rolling basis. And I take on consulting projects to keep the lights on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Angelo, for that. So I had asked one of the two to be a kind of prophet for good news. Both of them decided that there'll be no good news, and later on we'll find out why. Each of them thinks that COVID-19 is going to impact us very drastically, very dangerously. But maybe to start with, the United Nations just released a report about a day ago saying that 1.6 billion people are going to be out of workspaces because of COVID-19, and most of them are in the informal sector. And also in Africa, about 430 million people will lose their jobs. That's over half the working population of Africa. And when people mention words like that, it sounds like it's a broad thing, but bringing it down home, I know many people who've lost their jobs, some of them even on this phone call, or on this Zoom call with us. I know people who have taken pay cuts, some of them, including myself, were speaking. And so the anxieties are real, and they're not imagined. They're not something we're talking about in the future. So start with you, Angelo. What do you think the COVID-19 workspace will look like?
Well, it's a brave new world, right? You can actually say COVID-19 is not just a pandemic, it's a global event now. And look, I think that the certain approaches are consolidating now with regard to how governments and communities are responding to COVID-19 that will define the landscape. One is the rise of, I would say, to some extent, toxic nationalism. You're looking around the globe, you see news every day that many governments, especially those that have resources, are reserving those resources for their nationals. There's a tendency to keep out others, and what you consider generally othering. There is a desire to invest in so the effect is a piece by piece deconstruction of globalization as we know it. And at the level of country to country cooperation, you're going to see, more like bilateral deals. Someone needs iron ore from country X, they do it bilaterally. So the international system is coming under extreme pressure, and yet, when we think about guaranteeing opportunities for all dealing with global poverty, especially here in Africa the last 20 years, the vision has been that we want to trade with the rest of the world, including trade internally, to trade ourselves out of aid, and also to transfer the kinds of skills, for the 22nd, 23rd century that Africa needs. So the quick answer, Raymond, is that you will have islands of problems. If you bring it down to Uganda, it means that we are very likely going to be stuck with our East African neighbors. So we had better be nice to them. And that we will have to deal with, as I said in my earlier article, we'll have to deal with reviving the domestic economy in much more efficient ways in order to survive this.
All right. That's a really broad way to look at it. But again, like I said, Angelo and Brenda both decided to be prophets of doom. So, Brenda, just what does the
good news later?
Brenda, what does the workplace during COVID-19 look like? Because and I think it's something I raised with Kwesi, that we want to discuss post-COVID-19, but it may not come for a very long time. So what does the workplace during COVID-19 actually look like? Your microphone is mute.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I was saying that I'm very glad that you mentioned that, because I was thinking, when somebody says post-COVID, what exactly do they mean by post-COVID? I mean, to some people, it's when the lockdown is lifted. To others, it's going to go on for a couple of years, right? But I think, to speak to what Angelo said about the toxic nationalism, I think there's some positivity there. And given that the workplace has now, a lot of work is moving remote, it's at home. Like I mentioned, the Twitter CEO said that his employees can work at home indefinitely. And today we just saw Barclays global CEO following suit. And we're seeing that happening, a shift happening. And what that means actually is that when you see, for instance, the US closing its borders and saying no immigration, so you won't have people working in, Ugandans or other nationalities moving to the US to work, there's also an opportunity for people for the same jobs that they otherwise would have had to go to the US to do. Now they can do it from here. There's that opportunity. But I think for me, overall, what I see in the short term, it's going to be difficult times in the short term. Companies are cutting costs, and they are cutting costs very aggressively. So we will definitely, we're already going to continue as they start to recover, or even as they start to just find their footing. I'm talking about employers, yeah? So definitely we will have to see high competition for those, for the jobs that will be available, yeah? And we will, sorry, I got distracted by a message here. Yeah, but we will see a lot of those jobs becoming very competitive. And by extension, we might see a shift in how people are paid. Yeah, so the workplace now is going to be very competitive. You have to move from precarious to prepared. You have to be fully prepared for the new normal. You have to upskill. The skills are going to be changing very rapidly. So anyone that is not positioned to quickly learn or to quickly adapt to the new way things are done, if you're a lawyer and there's something else that is on the horizon that you might want to do, there's so many opportunities to learn for free. And I think now is the time to get prepared. So I think everyone needs to prepare for the new workplace, which is providing the opportunity for you to work for anyone in the world, but it's also making it more difficult because it's now more competitive. So it's two things in one.
Brenda, I wanted to first stay with you. Before COVID, there were already not enough jobs for young people.
Exactly.
So with COVID, there will be even lesser jobs for young people to do. And many people were working within the gig economy, and that gig economy has also been disrupted very heavily. What opportunities lie in the gig economy, but also what opportunities lie in this work from home that young people can exploit?
That's a great point. I mean, previously already technology had already changed. It had caused a shift in the way we're doing our work, and it had replaced a lot of manual jobs with a lot of other, computer-aided design jobs and other high-end jobs, right? So I'll give an example of a local startup, Safe Border, right? You have riders. They used to riding clients all over Kampala, right? What's happening now is that Safe Border quickly pivoted to include e-commerce on its platform. So now they have guys in the markets, women, men in the markets selling on their platform. They're having small shops and roadside people selling on their platform. So what I see is that we're going to have people innovating, especially within the gig economy, because now you have high supply, right, of people working, yeah, and people can see the value in these kinds of platforms. If you ask someone in Nalia market what they were making before and what they're making when Safe Border came on board, you can really see a shift, a positive shift. So there is that direct impact. A lot of people are going to have to align with the opportunities that are being presented by the entrepreneurs that are actually creating these opportunities very, very fast. And I think as much as it creates a problem, it's also creating very many opportunities outside of what we know as the usual 9 to 5. So if I have a skill as a graphic designer, or I can do some work, there will be people that will need that kind of skill. And I need to be alert to the opportunities that are being provided by the people, the entrepreneurs, by the businesses that are actually innovating within that space. So we have people working very hard to take advantage of the opportunities that COVID-19 is presenting, meaning that even individuals and employees or people that are maybe have less work to do now or have taken pay cuts, they will have to also use the extra time that work from home is giving them to actually be able to take advantage of these opportunities. And that's a great thing, because working from home and working remotely also gives you an opportunity to manage your time better. Previously, we were losing 4 hours a day in commutes from home to the office. Raymond, you've been in this traffic, you know the kind of headache that it presents, right? So if you take those 4 hours and you put them to something else that will bring in extra income, already I think we have a win. So people generally just have to be prepared and very cognizant of the fact that as much as it's doom, there are so many opportunities that are being presented that we need to take advantage of.
You hint on a point of opportunities being created, and it's something that I read in Angelo's piece, and something we talked about yesterday. The strategic shift from the luxury products, we are now going to become local again, consuming from the local markets, going to markets which are closer to our homes, and getting products from there. And I wanted Angelo to come in here. The point that you're making on economies becoming local. How does that
global luxury is going to be one of the big casualties of COVID, because why would you wear a 12,000 Louis Vuitton purse right now in the current circumstances? The virus has shown that these sorts of ideas about affluence don't matter. The person who has a 12,000 Louis Vuitton purse would have been better, last month if they were in Italy or Spain, with having the equivalent in masks or some other protective equipment, you see. So I think our ideas of, global luxury that has fueled this, this world we live in, where we think that certain types of consumerism, they represent the best out of quality of life. That will change. And with that change, what I meant by the global standards becoming local and that the essential becoming luxury is that the things that do matter, will now become cool to consume. I said the cottage industries will be back, and perhaps, people like Brenda here will understand what that means. If you're going to, if you need a pass, yeah, you might be able to get one from, the leather production workshop of some guy from Soga, and that's okay. And this evacuation of the idea of luxury from the stage and the welcoming of, basic but high quality goods produced locally, I think will improve the quality of life and the quality of life focus, and also the narrative about what is going to be like. So I actually think that, in some ways, if you are concerned with high global inequality, reading the Forbes list of the 500 top, the 1% who, by the way, have lost tons of money. If you think about how those opportunities being carved off the top are dropping to the bottom, then there is room for local people to grow. I noticed, though, that they, Brenda was trying to project what remoteness means in the context of the city economy. People working in closed spaces, high traffic, and all those things. Even there, we are seeing some advantages, brought about by COVID. One of our fellows was saying, now, perhaps commuting by bicycle will help with the clean air and this sort of things. The point I would like to make about the spatial impact of COVID, this remoteness, is to do with the rest of the country. So in Uganda, if you think about COVID-19 as an economic disruptor, we already lived through it. Our equivalent of COVID-19 was structural adjustment. It completely took out the 9-to-5 idea. Structural adjustment in the 90s with privatization meant that former state managed economy that gave us the idea of your dad working from 9 to 5, that died. Here in Uganda, we talk about that every Ugandan has got 3 jobs. Isn't that the reality that that we all have? That the Ugandan is already multi-skilled. He has his stall. He has his other thing he's doing with his circle. He has his main job, and then he's in school at night, and then he has the fellowship where there's another job, right? That's one. The Ugandans are already, I think, primed, for this kind of disruption. The second is that the majority of Ugandan workers were already working remotely, in the sense that they're informal workers. They're kind of removed from the formal workspace. And for those, we have to reduce their remoteness. We have to bring them into formal spaces where they can contribute in a much more functional way. And that there too, we shall see a lot more opportunities. So in short, I think that organized approaches to try and bring labor, and how I put it in my article is to deal with the Ugandan crisis, which has always been, you have got this huge work plans. You're trying to build viable societies. You're trying to, like now we're trying to create 9 new cities. You're trying to provide for those cities, roads and electricity. You want livable workspaces. You want reservoirs. You want sewage systems. You want markets. You want schools. You want playgrounds. You want organized agriculture to deal with that. You want health centers. That is the amount of work. Then you have got a very large youth population, multi-skilled, completely resilient because they're already working and they're surviving under really hard conditions. They are also trained because human capital is very, very high in Uganda. You want a process of connecting the two together to say that this workspace and these young people must come, into some kind of fusion. Now, that is a challenge.
I just wanted to interrupt you very briefly. I hear a lot about the remote work, but what I want to hear is what's the work? I mean, we can all be remote, but if Raymond has been working on TV as a journalist and is out of that job, him becoming a market vendor will require reskilling, retooling, but also broadly across the region. In Kenya, for example, there's no lockdown. There are restrictions on movement from county to county, but there's no lockdown. When you go to Rwanda, for example, the lockdown has been lifted to allow people to go to work. And maybe the work culture there might show us how the region will behave. But what I want us to first answer is, what's this work that people are coming to? Even if they come to it remotely, what work will be there for them to do during the COVID and post-COVID?
Yeah, so, and I'll go first and I'll hand it over to Brenda. Well, that's what I was explaining, is essentially what that work is. Of course, government policy right now could easily create work. Like, on the back of this, Raymond, I was speaking to, government ministers about their 9 and 13 industrial parks, which by and large, by the way, are still empty. There's a ton of companies that ought to be moving to those parks. And those are just for industrial production, So there are jobs there. The question would be, are workers willing now to consider going to a factory floor, leaving the comfort of their homes, wherever they are, and going to this new industrial reality because there are no other jobs? That is one. Second, if you think about it, work is really service. So the first thing you have to ask yourself, Raymond, if you lose your TV job, is who else has a service that I can offer, which they need and can pay for, and who is near me? So if people ask themselves those questions, it will become immediately clear what you can, where you can fit within the new economy. Say, Angelo Izama, I'm back in Kampala. There are things I like to do, which I used to do casually. Like I write, of course. I can construct. I can script. Maybe those jobs are no longer there. But I see people saying, you see you running all the time. You do all these exercises with your buddies. Can we get together because, health is an issue? Are there a nutritionist in your group? Now we're offering a new service that could grow. I think there's going to be a lot of people need to adapt the skills they have, to services that others will need.
Brenda, what work will people be coming to?
Yeah, so Raymond, I'll give you an example. Before social media, we had work and jobs as we knew it. When social media came, nobody knew that, Kylie Jenner would get $300,000 from a company, just because of her social media presence. Now, we've noticed something during the lockdown and during quarantine, the rise of TikTok. There has never been more content created online like during this time. And I kid you not, content creators are getting paid, right? I'm glad that you mentioned something about, and you gave your example. So you're no longer on TV, but I imagine that you are a multifaceted individual. So if you're not on TV, journalism is not just TV, it's so many other things, yeah? I would like to believe. I have never been a journalist. I don't know how that works. But I've read some of the things you've written. I have followed, there's so much that you've done outside of TV that has been very impactful, right? Some of those things people can pay for, and there will be demand for certain services that people are going to want to, businesses are going to want to remain competitive. Businesses are going to want people like you to help them market their products. So there are so many other opportunities that are arising from that. Exactly the way we have seen, YouTube is paying people a lot of money for content creation, and people are doing it more now than ever before. So that's an example of how the world has changed and how people are actually making money during a not so, nice time, right? So my belief is that, remote work is not what you would call like, I have this job that I'm used to, and now I'm just shifting to doing it from home. It is, Brenda can, okay, so I run a company, we do production of glasses, but I'm also great with 3D design and 3D printing, and I can offer that service to a company that is looking into a fresh manufacturing aspect, and they want to take on 3D printing as a way of manufacturing. I can offer that service at a fee, and those kinds of skills are going to be desirable, and I can actually do it at home. I can model something from home and make sure that I deliver within a specific period of time. So I don't think it's all gloom. I don't think it's all lost. Even within I'll give you an example. Again, for instance, you're an auditor and you've been working for a Big Four firm, but then they've decided to retrench, or you don't have work anymore, and maybe you're not working from home at that job, but you have picked up so many skills at that job that, you're great at financial analysis, you're great at business modeling, you're great at so many other small things that are not directly what I would call audits or the title of your job, but there are things that you learned along the way that actually right now people need. I mean, still, even when jobs are lost, I believe that there are others that are created. Zoom moves from 75 million users to 200 million users in a couple of months. That creates so much opportunity, and they're growing. It's a company that's growing. So there are so many other companies that are growing that are hiring. Amazon recently hired hundreds of thousands of people in different positions. So the idea really is to be flexible with the skills that we have, with what we have learned, and be open to switching up when need arises. And I think that is exactly how things should have been in the beginning. We shouldn't have been tied to, I'm a secretary and this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. It's the flexibility, the agility is exactly what we all need to be doing.
I want to ask you guys a final question so that I can allow other people to ask questions. And my final question is, the amount of capital available for business has reduced tremendously. And when I say tremendously, we're talking in the north of 30 to 40%. So even when work is available, the payment will be reduced. People who've been earning a lot will now have to contend with earning less. And not just to look at ourselves, because as a think tank, as a leadership think tank like Leo Africa, we have to also think for what becomes for Africa in this new world. So how can Africa create fresh capital in this COVID time to replace the capital that's been taken away by remittances, replace capital that's been taken away by the global hospitality industry? What can be done?
Well, this would have been a question for the policy people that you and I deal with, Raymond. But someone actually just asked, to Msime said, we need to talk about the government stimulus package designed to create jobs quickly. I'm going to leave you, Raymond, for reasons as you know, to address that challenge. My interaction with the question of capital with the government over the years has been down to waste and expenditure. So we have this, problem, which is best reflected in the way interest rates are calculated. So the government of Uganda, particularly, lives above its means. So it spends money it doesn't have. So when it does that, it creates this instrument for people who can lend it money, to do so at good rates. We call them bonds and other things. So those bonds become the main lending, if you like, business of commercial banks. And when commercial banks lend to the government, they don't have money to lend across the counter to you. And then the cycle keeps going on, because now money that is left available for small businesses are calculated upwards of 24%. Now, for years, literally for 2 decades, there has been an ongoing discussion on how do you get out of that trap where the government spends so highly, the central bank and others, create this room for government to borrow domestically from banks. Interest rates are high. Come every 5 years, you've got again, very high inflation, which means that the central bank again does what we call mopping up, again providing, very, very, juicy instruments. So that trap there, hopefully with COVID and with governments being more internally minded, perhaps we can get out of it. But I have seen that if you take the government out of the equation and you allow people to do things the way they would, lending societies are already filling that gap. So you have got the growth of SACCOs and other lending societies that have accumulated hundreds of billions in lendable credit. We have to speak to those people about how to stabilize that lending society and make it available, particularly for small business. So this is a leadership crisis. Incidentally, my last point on the question of technology would be that what technology has done. So in 2008, when we said, what is Uganda's problem? How do you define it? One of the things we come up with is that we have a challenge of what you call information asymmetry. If you look at both how private and public affairs are organized, so many people are working in silos. What the information society has done is allow people to access what other people are doing. So I see that in the future, both for credit and for skills, that what technology can do for us is to break down that information asymmetry, allowing people to get to customers, to find new skills, whether skills are available online, to find new collaborators, start new collaborations. That is really the world that we are going to. We need I wrote part one of what this post-COVID world is going to look like, and to Shah and others who are thinking about the stimulus package, I'll address it in part two. Just to tell you that within the government of Uganda, there has been a robust conversation about how to go about assisting jobs and workers. The people who have suggested that the government takes less money out means, provides tax credits, pay as you earn relief to companies, tax holidays for domestic businesses. That group has lost out. The challenge of leadership would be to try and get that back on track. Raymond.
Thank you so much, Angelo. But also I wanted to ask anyone who has questions to either raise your hand or text in the chat box so that we can get your questions. So Brenda.
Yeah, I mean, Angelo has talked very extensively about the part that government is playing in making it easier to lend. And this is actually happening because you're having companies like Kuza Credit actually giving credit to e-commerce players and then recovering that money through the platforms that collects money and end up paying the e-commerce, the suppliers the vendors, if I should say. So capital has always been a conversation we always have in startup circles. We've always been looking for money. Every company, if you ask them, what do you need? They'll tell you they need money, they need capital. So capital has always been something that we've talked about, and now it's harder than before to actually have access to investment. But I also have to tell you, Raymond, that it's not that all investment in Africa is gone, or that all investment here is gone. We are actually having, and I've seen calls for people to submit projects that are aligned with what specific organizations and capital people, if I should call it that way, what they term as their new normal or the future. So previously you had people say, okay, we'll invest in blockchain because we see it as the new future. We'll invest in looking at investments targeted to specific sectors. And I mean, I have a few resources that I could share later, but it's definitely, I think, it's not capital for everybody. So of course, some if you're in the hospitality space, it might be more difficult to actually get this capital because most of them are looking at that as a risky area, right? It's all risk and rewards. So I feel like it's extremely risky right now. If you're talking about tourism, airline space, you're seeing investors pulling out of that. But make no mistake, investors are actually putting their money elsewhere because no one wants money to sit for extended periods of time, because there are opportunities for investors to invest. So we are going to see this over time. And I mean, every day we look at the news and we see a lot of companies closing rounds of investment. And this has been happening during this COVID time. So it's not all doom. Capital is still coming in. It's less than it was before because the areas are actually now more narrowed down than they were before. So it's specific areas that are getting investment. And I think even innovators and entrepreneurs that are thinking should be thinking within those kinds of areas. If you want investment for tech, align. That's how I think things have been moving. Yeah, that's what I think is going to happen, and it's going to continue happening for a couple of more years.
So we have a question from Hashim, who is asking, what exactly is the new normal? Is it in the way that we are addressing the problem now? Are we finding new ways of thinking about the problem? And also, if that's the new normal, then how should young people position themselves, particularly from Africa, to solve some of these problems? And I want you guys to talk about Africa as a continent, not just Uganda.
Okay, so at the institute, of course, we think that crises like this are a leadership challenge, and as a leadership challenge, I apply about 4 principles to it. So just to indulge those who are outside of our Leo family, the principles we have, clarity, which is that you have to be brutally honest about what is actually going on. I do not embellish it. For example, when you talk about TikTok and content creation, someone has to say, okay, but how does the money travel from point X to my pockets? If you're thinking about, I am working in the gig economy, we know that is already very fragile. Money doesn't come all the time. If people are not spending money, like I see that Anne Whitehead was in the chat saying, we have always been working remotely, but if customers are not spending, then we don't get any money. So that's also the reality. So one has to be very brutally honest about the reality that you're dealing with first. And as a leadership question, we think, yes, let there be absolutely no doubt as to the reality of what is possible and what is not. The second is to try and generate new knowledge about your situation and to rely on your own ability to generate that knowledge. This will help. If you're a young person, like I said, you need to get out and step out of your home and look at the reality as you observe it, you know. For example, if you are living in a neighborhood where you've had to buy, you know, you're a bachelor like Raymond, and you have to buy, you know, 2,000 shillings worth of tomatoes, a couple of onions, you live on Rolex and that sort of thing, and you realize that, look, this is going to be my diet for a long time, ask yourself how you can be part of that solution, right? Do you want to expand that store? Take your 50,000 or 200,000 that you have, create another store, you know? Try and think about that as the opportunity for you and many other people around there. Relying on your own ability to generate knowledge is so essential, especially here in Africa, because there's a lot more. Sometimes I feel that we are more outwardly looking for solutions than generating solutions locally. The third thing is that we need to be empathetic about the situation you're facing. When COVID started, I actually had assigned a friend of mine, a journalist, the job of dealing with the psychology, and that's to refer to what Hashim said, the psychology of resilience. You must know that in parts of the global north, like where I am now, last major crisis that they had, it's like here in California, we've had drought and fires and that sort of thing. But the last major crisis people really faced was the World War. That's in 1945. So many societies around the world have actually been living it nice. What have you guys been doing? You've had you know, political instability from the late 60s. Most of you have got parents who have been in exile. That's a fact. You have had the destruction of pandemics in Uganda, more than one, HIV being the biggest of them. And you've had, you know, economic and instability. Like I said, the real COVID was structural adjustment in the 90s. In other words, you have already lived through this. And my idea was, if you think things are really bad, you know, you need to go up there in West Nile, where I come from, to those refugee camps. Ask those people, you know, what does it mean to be in a crisis? That will adjust you quite quickly. And you might want to start thinking about yourself in the context of the reality that you live, that we're not really doing that badly. We're already resilient as it is. And therefore now we can start moving with that resilience and moving with confidence. Have that empathy for your own people, because don't worry about, you know, the Japanese student who for the first time, you know, is dealing with just the psychology of being disconnected. No, deal with your own reality here. You okay? Let's be empathetic to each other. That's the fourth, as a leadership challenge, is we think about volunteerism. Be connected. To be remote, when you think about it in terms of these phones, it's just about technology. But you can be also remote in ways that are destructive. Raymond, if you're not speaking to more than 5 or 10 people in a day, physically, you're doing badly. So you need to break that remoteness and do so by volunteering. This is how collaborations happen. This is how you meet with other like-minded people. This is how new businesses get started, and that this is how it's done. So Hashim, the long and short answer is that, you know, to deal with the new normal is to arm yourself with a simply new approach to thinking about the problems that are there. And from this conversation, I see it as looking at what we're dealing with as a set of new opportunities, not as an ongoing crisis.
There's a question that's raised by Sherry here that we also need to respond to, that remote work opens the pool up for competition, competition we may not be ready for. So for example, if you say banking should go online, Kenyan bankers will apply for Ugandan jobs because they can do those from Kenya and probably are more skilled than we are. or even some fellows in this very institute who can do our jobs will apply for our jobs and be able to do them remotely. Mm-hmm. So with this new opened up competition, how can we skill ourselves so that we are equally as competitive as fellows from Leo Africa across the board in Africa?
Brenda, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of talk about what Angelo was saying before, and then jump into that question as well. You talked about the new normal, and I just wanted to remind people, if you remember before 9/11, like I can't imagine, I hadn't traveled before, but apparently people would walk through and not even go through security checks. It would take 30 minutes to board a plane and take off, right? And then after that, all this inconvenience, security checks, and all these other things that come because of what happened, because of 9/11, people have had to adapt. It's not the most comfortable situation, but it hasn't been impossible to travel either. So again, I think it's going to be a challenge, but then I think all of us as human beings we naturally adapt to situations, yeah? So Raymond, could you just repeat that?
Sherry's question is about competition. When you open up for remote work, the pool of workers is global, and some people might be far more skilled than others in accessing those opportunities. So how do you skill yourself to be able to compete globally?
Yeah, I think again, the opportunity for remote work also gives opportunity for skilling, right? So we have seen situations like a lot of universities, for instance, are offering a lot of things online. They're actually cutting the cost of certain courses. Raymond, are you there? Okay, yeah, there you are.
I hear you.
Yeah, so they are actually offering a lot of courses free or at subsidized prices. We've seen Yale, we've seen Harvard, all of them offering very specialized courses at a very large fraction of the courses that they had before. We need to take advantage of things like that, and that also, in the same way, makes us competitive. I mean, if you're looking at Kenyans being able to get jobs in Uganda, also think about Ugandans being able to get jobs elsewhere, because there's so many opportunities that actually we have and that we are positioned for, that we can take a lot of advantage of. So like I mentioned earlier, now the skill cycle is going to be changing very, very quickly, and we need to actually keep upskilling. There are some companies that offer e-learnings and offer online courses for their employees, but even if you're not a part of companies like that, right now some of them are even offering some of their content for free. So much, I mean, thanks to the internet, there's so much we can get online. And I mean, even myself, 3D design and all that, I did not go to school for that. I actually got all that from the internet. So right now that we have the opportunity to even compete for jobs we didn't have before, let's take advantage of the free tools or the more affordable tools that we have right now, so that we are also able to be just as competitive, if not even more competitive than other people. And by the way, Raymond, it's not always that Ugandans are not as competitive. And I've had Ugandans that I've known Ugandans that are amazing. Even when they move to the US, which has very highly skilled people, they are at the top of their game. So it's really just a matter of taking advantage of the opportunities that we have.
All right, thank you. We don't have enough time, but I wanted us to respond at least to one more question. The facilities that exist in cities like Kampala are not the same that exist in places like Gulu. So when we talk about things like delivery services, for example, Jumia doesn't work outside of Kampala in Wakiso. So what opportunities exist in that space to create those systems in upcountry towns, or even in other towns across East Africa for fellows?
Well, it's interesting you say, Jumia doesn't exist in Gulu. A couple of years ago, I would go through Gulu on my way to Moyo, and I couldn't get a decent cup of coffee. Now there are a couple of decent coffee shops in that town. Earlier I had written that the global has to become local in terms of standards. Ugandans have been very, very adept at transferring ideas from abroad and planting them locally. And I have no doubt that someone is going to come up with the Gulu version of Jumia in the shortest possible time. That will work out. How you know that Ugandans are capable of relocating or transplanting ideas from the towns to local areas is if you travel to other parts of East Africa or Southern Africa, the bed and breakfast in Ugandan towns appear like 4-star luxury, because most Ugandans, they will say my hotel has to look like this. So you find even in some remote area that there's a TV screen. The TV is not working, but it's up there. There is a tiled floor in the bathroom, and the bed is laid with this cheap Chinese bed sheets. But it looks very much like something that has been lifted out of what the Serena or Africana would look like. There's an active program that is organic of taking ideas from the cities and bringing them into the towns. Of course, it means that, and we have said this to the fellows, that they need to find ways of traveling their ideas by getting on board with these collaborations. And let's take one example, which is essential to COVID-19. Some of the most promising aspects of the disease control I've seen have to do with vitamins, vitamin D, vitamin C, and other things. So they're dealing with nutrition. The one thing that we are known for in our country is the abundance of food, fruits, and vegetables. At the beginning of this crisis, I in fact had suggested to the very first week when the lockdown happened, I had suggested to people in power that, look, let us create a robust program of nutrition and say to Ugandans that everyone must have a balanced diet. That is a whole industry there that's waiting to happen. Well, a lot of that food is grown in grown-up country, and the opportunity there is for people like you in the towns, to try and take advantage of the modern tools of narrating, creating value in perception, in the quality, in the presentation, and in the culture of how do you eat right. That's a whole industry that is waiting. Then it's totally local. I wouldn't be too concerned about someone in Gulu not being able to, order an iPhone online. But I certainly would be happy if the equivalent is that they're able to take your city ideas from wherever they are and present a local solution, but at the same time provide you with an equal opportunity, of getting something as simple as shea butter, which comes from that part of the world, and putting it in the cities as a new cool, healthy habit to take on and to make money from.
All right, thank you so much. I'm afraid we're out of time, so we have to close this. But before we close it, we've had over 40 people who've been listening and watching this conversation. And we ran a poll just to ask them what they think. Will we change for the better or for the worse post-COVID? And just a sense of the results that I've been given, and I hope that Kwesi is a fair electoral commission in this case. So we have 40% of the people who are 16 who say, yes, we will have a better world post-COVID. 23%, which is 9 people, say, no, there will be no better world post-COVID. And just the sense of the anxiety. 15, who are 38%, say they're not sure where we are going. And maybe in a minute each, to wrap this up, what's your own sense? Where are we going? Are we going for the better, for the worse, or you're equally not sure about where we're heading?
The short term will be harsh, and in the long term, this will self-correct. It will be okay.
Brenda?
I think that depends really. That really depends on who you are. Everyone is going to have different fates. The people that were well placed before COVID are making money. I'm talking about companies that had set up infrastructure to actually, that just was accelerated by the pandemic. So there are people who saw opportunity and there are those who didn't. In the short term, like Angelo said, majority of people are going to find it bumpy, especially if they were not prepared before. But beyond that, I think people will stabilize and they will adapt. Yeah, so it depends on how you look at it and how prepared you are for the future.
All right, thank you so much, Brenda. Thank you so much, Angelo. I will now allow Kwesi to say something before we officially close this off. I see he's already annoyed. We've only gone 1 minute into the time. You actually were on the dot for the time that you gave me. So Kwesi, you can wrap this up.
Thank you very much, Raymond. I don't think there's anything useful other than a huge thank you to our panelists. This conversation will continue. You can engage with us and with the panelists through our Facebook and Twitter channels. Follow the conversation using the hashtag COVID-19 Reset. We'll have 3 more of these coming, one on ideas and industries for the future, which hopefully will cover some of the questions that were not answered today, and something that Angelo mentioned, which was important, which is on leadership for these rapidly changing times. We'll also have a conversation on that coming. And much later on, in mid-June or July, we'll have one conversation on something that is perhaps going to be the next pandemic, which is climate change and trying to link it to COVID-19. So thank you very much, Raymond. Thank you, Angelo. Thank you, Brenda. And thank you to all our, at some point, were 45 participants for being part of this wonderful conversation. Thank you all.
All right, thank you so much. Kwesi doesn't mention that you can also write for the COVID Reset project on the Leo Africa blog. So if you have some thoughts, share those thoughts in writing to Kwesi and they will be published on the Reset project.
Thank you, Raymond.
All right, cheers.